You know, every society has its differences. But what happens when those differences become deep political divisions? Well, in a democracy as big and as complicated as India, the fault lines of gender, religion, and caste, they don't just shape our private lives, they explode into the political arena, becoming these incredibly powerful and sometimes very explosive forces. So, how do we unpack all of this? Well, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at how social divisions in democracy interact in general. Then, we'll dive deep into the big three: gender, religion, and caste. And we'll wrap it all up by asking a really important question. Are these divisions just a weakness, or could they actually be a source of strength? All right, let's start with the basics. Social diversity. That's just a fact of life, right? In any country. But here's where it gets complicated for a democracy. The real challenge pops up when those differences start to overlap with social and economic inequality. That's the moment when simple diversity can curdle into some really deep, painful division. And that really boils down to this one big question. Is the personal actually political? We're about to see how these divisions that feel so private, the ones rooted in our homes or families or faiths, they just don't stay there. They spill out and end up shaping the very public, very high-stakes world of politics and power. Okay, so let's kick things off with gender. It's a perfect example of how this all works. We're going to explore how these roles and expectations, things that are often just brushed off as natural or a private family matter, actually end up having massive political consequences. And it often starts with something so incredibly common, we barely even notice it: the sexual division of labor. It's this unspoken, almost universally accepted idea that all the work inside the home, the cooking, the cleaning, raising the kids, is basically women's work. Meanwhile, the real work, the stuff that gets you paid, that happens outside the home and is seen as a man's domain. And wow, this cartoon just captures that idea perfectly. You see the daughter watching her mom, who is working constantly, from morning till night. But if you ask the mother, she might just say, I don't work. I'm just a housewife. It's such a powerful picture of how all this relentless labor goes unpaid, completely unrecognized, and isn't even counted as work. And if you look at the numbers, they tell the exact same story in a really stark way. On average, an Indian woman works over an hour more than a man every single day. But look at where that time is going. The vast majority of her day is spent on unpaid household work. It's like this massive, hidden economic engine that our whole society runs on, and it's powered by invisible labor. Now, this isn't just about economics. It's reinforced by some really powerful social pressures. Just look at all these different perceptions of the ideal woman. She's supposed to be the ideal viewer for TV shows, the ideal housewife, the ideal bride for a family. Each one of these stereotypes helps to lock in a very specific and often very limiting set of expectations. And it's so important to get that this isn't just a bunch of random old habits. It's all part of a bigger system, a male-dominated social structure that we call patriarchy. At its core, it's a system that's literally designed to value men more and give them power over women. And this system has absolutely devastating real-world consequences. We see it in the huge literacy gap between men and women. We see it in unequal pay for the exact same job, everywhere from farms and factories to the film industry. And then there's the most chilling effect of all: this deep-rooted preference for sons, which has led to sex-selective abortion and a child-sex ratio that is dangerously out of balance. So it shouldn't be a surprise that this power imbalance shows up in our politics. I mean, look at this. In Nordic countries, women make up about 40% of their parliaments. The world average is almost 17%. And in India, it's less than 10%. The gap isn't just big, it is enormous. This cartoon just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the political reality behind those numbers. For more than a decade now, there has been a bill to reserve 1/3 of seats for women in parliament, but it's been stuck. And why? Because it keeps getting blocked by a political system that is still overwhelmingly run by men. All right, let's pivot now to another huge line of division: religion. This is where something as personal as faith and identity can become this really volatile and sometimes very dangerous force in the public and political sphere. Now, Gandhiji famously said that religion can never be separated from politics. But he didn't mean using one religion to dominate another. For him, it meant that politics had to be guided by the moral and ethical values that you find in all religions. But as we all know, that relationship can take a much, much darker turn. And the trouble really kicks off with this idea of communalism. It's this dangerous belief that your religion is the main thing that defines you and your community. It pushes the idea that everyone in one religion has the same interests and that those interests are totally at odds with other religions. And at its worst, it leads to using the power of the state to make one group dominant over all the others. So, to guard against exactly this danger, India's constitution established a secular state. Now, this doesn't mean the state is anti-religion, not at all. It means the state doesn't have an official religion. It guarantees every single person the freedom to practice their faith, it forbids discrimination, and, this is key, it can even step in on religious matters to make sure there's equality, like when it banned the practice of untouchability. But as this cartoon so cleverly shows, the ideal of secularism is one thing, and the messy reality of day-to-day politics is another. You see this politician's chair just cobbled together from symbols of different faiths. And the caption says it all: there will be plenty of rocking. It's a perfect visual for the constant, delicate, and often shaky balancing act that is secular politics in practice. Okay, for our final deep dive, let's talk about a social division that, in its traditional form, is really unique to India: caste. We're going to dig into its incredibly complex and often tense relationship with modern democracy. The caste system was way more than just a job description. It was a rigid social pyramid, a prison really, that you were born into and could never escape. It decided your job, who you could marry, even who you could eat with. And it was all based on these oppressive ideas of exclusion and discrimination. And even though that old system is breaking down, especially in cities, its ghost is still very much with us. The legacy of centuries of advantage for some and disadvantage for others is still here. Just look at these poverty rates. Almost 46% for scheduled tribes, but less than 12% for Hindu upper castes. The economic impact is still very, very real. This stark reality has made caste a central part of the political playbook. This cartoon, The Vote Bank of India, says it all. You see politicians treating entire caste communities like these guaranteed blocks of votes, or vote banks, that they can win over simply by appealing to that specific caste identity. But here's the really crucial thing to understand. It's a two-way street. It's not just that politics becomes all about caste, with parties making these cold calculations. It's also that caste itself becomes politicized. Different caste groups learn to use the tools of democracy. They form alliances, they negotiate with parties, and they demand their fair share of power and resources. So after looking at gender, religion, and caste, we're left with this big final question. Are these deep social divisions purely a bad thing, a fundamental weakness for a democracy like India? Or is there maybe another way to look at this? And this is where things get really interesting, because there's a paradox here. While politics based on identity can be incredibly divisive, it can also be a really powerful tool for empowerment. It gives marginalized groups, whether it's women demanding representation or Dalit communities demanding access to resources, a platform to make their voices heard and to fight for justice inside the system. And that leaves us with this final critical thought to chew on. The real test of a democracy isn't trying to pretend these differences don't exist. The real challenge is to manage them. Can the political arena, which is so often a battlefield, be transformed into a platform that turns these deep lines of division into bridges for dialogue, for negotiation, and ultimately, for a more just society for everyone?